John Busbee with a Culture Buzz, and just like wonderful clockwork, every 2 months or so, I like to let you folks know about what's in the new issue of Iowa History Journal. Um, I started off years ago just covering this because I found it to be one of the most fascinating and best reading magazines that I've ever found. When I was interviewing the publisher and the founder of Iowa History Journal. And after a while, full reveal, I was able to occasionally write a story for Iowa History Journal. But that doesn't mean I don't continue covering it. Of course I do, because the arts is a contact sport and you must be involved. But I'm tickled to share with you someone who many of you know him from his work with the Iowa State Historical Society, or the State Historical Society of Iowa. I'll get it right yet. Jerome Thompson is with me, and he's got a fantastic two-part series. So we're going to kind of do what they did on the old time Saturday afternoon serials. We'll probably leave a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of our conversation today, but I do encourage you, go and get this copy. If you're not a subscriber, there's an easy way to get engaged because these stories are timeless. There are a number of fans out there who've worked hard and have been readers since the very beginning, and they have the full set because these are stories that, quite honestly, they never end. They are fantastic stories to refer to, and you will enjoy everything you read in an Iowa History Journal. Just go to iowahistoryjournal.com. If you're not a subscriber, you can pay a couple of extra bucks, get the current issue that we're going to be talking about, plus be set up for the next year of 6 great issues. And when you see the low price that publisher Michael Swanger charges, you're going to say, holy smokes, that's a heck of a deal. Well, that's what it is. Jerome, ever since you retired, there's one thing that I will pose to you, and that is someone who has a passion for history never really retires from getting engaged and enjoying what history has to offer. Tell us what you're doing now in and I'm going to use heavy quotes, a volunteer capacity for that wonderful Gold Star Museum of Michael Votes.
Well, John, when I retired, I decided I needed to find some new sandboxes. So about 10 years ago, after I retired, I started volunteering in the archives at the Iowa Gold Star Military Museum at Camp Dodge. And in the beginning, they had moved to a new building and there were some backlog of things that needed to get organized and some older collections that needed to be cataloged. And so we finally caught up with that. And last summer, a year ago, a banker's box appeared on my desk. And in that box were National Guard records from the 1930s that covered 4 times when the National Guard was called out by the governor to deal with civil unrest, I guess you would call it. And this particular article is about the 1931 Cow Wars. Now, that's the name that was given to it by the press, but also referred to by the National Guard. There have been other articles that had been written about the Cow Wars, but none of those had ever used the official National Guard records. So that kind of gave me some fresh material to give to Michael and say, hey, we're going to write this from the National Guard perspective. And as a sort of a background, it all stemmed for mandatory testing for bovine tuberculosis. It was known for years that if a person ate meat or drank milk from an infected cow, it's transmittable from cattle to people. And tuberculosis was a kind of a scourge at that time. And beginning about 1919, they started to require testing, but it wasn't mandatory. And there were a number of farmers who were concerned and weren't sure of the science of it, that it might cause cattle to abort calves or cause other maladies. So there was an opposition to testing. So most of the work that's been done on that dealt with protests in Cedar County around Tipton. But there were also other areas of the state that we'll get into in part two. Beginning in about 1929, testing was mandatory. Before that, it was voluntary. Farmers who did have their herds tested could be certified so that they could sell them or, trade them, whatever. But in 29, it became a mandatory requirement.
Let me give you a chance to catch your breath. Jerome Thompson is my guest, and he is telling us about part one of a two-part story. That's how much there is to share with this Call Out the Guard, the Cow War of 1931. I was absolutely fascinated by it, and obviously a lot was precipitated by the great crash of 1929. And I have to believe that one of the motivating factors for farmers is the simple fact that each head of livestock that they had was viewed as a cash asset. And if all of a sudden they were told they can't have that cash asset or would be paid not what they thought it was worth, farmers kind of dug in their heels, didn't they?
They certainly did. Beginning in March 1931, the state veterinarians entered a farm near Clarence, Iowa, and about 600 farmers refused to allow the testing. And they had a very organized system of using the telephone to send out alerts to other people who would show up at a farm and kind of try to block the veterinarians from doing their testing, including law enforcement. That same March, about 1,200 farmers went on a special chartered train to Des Moines to meet with the legislature on a bill that would repeal the testing. Well, after that, there was an organization called the Farmers Protective Association was formed. And there were some key figures that are detailed in the story that were involved with that. From March until September of 1931, it was pretty calm. Not much was happening. But in September 22nd, there was a major event at one of the farms where the protesters drove the veterinarians away with rotten fruit and tomatoes and pitchforks, and they punctured tires and poured mud into the radiators of the cars. And that's at the point where Governor Turner said, "Call out the guard." So in that September, there were guard units from all over Iowa. About 1,600 went to Tipton, Iowa, and where they set up a camp. And their purpose, this was not martial law, but the governor sent out the guard to help local law enforcement do their duties. There are some striking photographs that are included in the article,
Yes.
including several machine gun detachments. And the guard would send out these detachments to a farm where testing was going to happen, and they would set up roadblocks. It's safe to say that there wasn't any event where a firearm was discharged, but this was a deterrent. Some interesting things happened during that particular time, which basically lasted for the month of September. 1,500 guardsmen in Tipton. Actually, a lot of the local merchants were really happy about it because the National Guard was buying their supplies locally and feeding 1,500 soldiers. At one point, the camp was open to the public, and they even brought in the National Guard band to provide concert performances at the fairgrounds. And while, there were some of the farmers who were feeling very oppressed by this, there was some positive sentiment towards having that presence.
Amazing. And I think what your research and developing the story shows is that saving archives in Iowa is an essential part of kind of the responsibility that all generations have to preserve what they can, because you never know when the contents will reveal fascinating glimpses into our past. And in this case, something that turns out to be very relevant to modern times, which I find fascinating. Jerome Thompson is my guest. He is the author of a two-part story in Iowa History Journal. First part is in the September-October issue. And guess what? In a couple of months, Jerome and I will get back together and talk about part two. But lest you think this is the only fascinating story in this issue, perish that thought. As always, Iowa History Journal is filled with columns, with interesting facts, and more stories. In this case, we're talking about a century of Carson. That's right. We're going to call attention to Johnny Carson, who was born in Corning, Iowa. Also, Montauk, the historic site in northeast Iowa, and the history of UNI football. It wasn't all under the dome, so to speak. They had some pretty wild times outside of that now hallowed venue. But I want to get back to Cow Wars because, one, it's a very colorful title for the event, and it's obviously something that the press picked up on, media picked up on, but so did the National Guard. How did the farmers who were resisting this encroachment on what they thought was their sovereign territory feel about this? And did they call it the Cow Wars too, Jerome?
It kind of became, I guess, general knowledge. Now, there were a number of the farmers who were protesting who were arrested. And one of them was actually picked up and sent to Anamosa State Penitentiary for, quote, safekeeping. He was later released, and actually, from what I was able to follow, never, his trial, he never went to trial. There's some humorous things that I came across, and towards the end, as the event was wrapping up in Cedar County, there were a number of the soldiers that requested furloughs so that they could return to their homes, their jobs, maybe dealing with a family emergency. But one of the interesting ones was the superintendent of Malvern Schools wrote a letter to General Findlay, who was in charge of everything, requesting that 5 high school students from Malvern be returned so they could, finish up their classes. Now, these were like seniors. You had to be 18 to join the Guard. But in doing a little bit of digging, it turned out that those 5 students were a major part of the Malvern football team, and they needed to come back.
There usually is kind of an underlying reason for things like that. As we wrap things up, folks, iowahistoryjournal.com. If you're just learning about this publication, you need to connect with it. Fascinating reading every 2 months. It's delivered right to your doorstep. You will receive it before it's available on the newsstand. So save yourself a trip to all the different outlets that carry Iowa History Journal, and you will have a chance to enjoy such fascinating stories as Jerome Thompson's Cow War of 1931 series. As we wrap things up, one thing I want to comment on, and you mentioned it a little bit before, the photographs you've included here. These are fascinating photographs that I bet if they've ever been seen, they've orally seen almost 100 years ago.
A lot of these came from newspapers sources. The Des Moines Register, as a matter of fact, even had an airplane that would pilot some of their reporters around to get the story. And most of the sources of previous articles were primarily drawn from newspapers, and so this is fresh territory with the National Guard records.
Wow. Fantastic stuff as always. Jerome Thompson, he is a sage when it comes to the world of history, and he has found a fascinating story. It's just, you're going to be immersed in it and just say, oh my gosh. And so grateful that you will get a chance to read about it in Iowa History Journal. Jerome, we'll see you in a couple of months to talk about part 2 because you set it up beautifully right now.
Thank you, John. We'll get into part 2 where we get into public reaction